Let me show you how to draw this cool forest scene, step by step, the easy way. This is going to be a 3H pencil. Notice I'm going to use the side of my pencil. If I use the tip like this, you're going to have a nice sharp line like we have for the outline. But if you use the side, it's going to be much softer. And I'm going to lightly shade just to get a gray value all the way across my paper. And it fits. We're going to try to keep this soft and smooth, but we're going to go over it afterwards. This is just the background. What we're doing now is just blocking in the background. This is going to be covered almost like if you started a painting. For any of you that paint, you start with the background and work your way to the foreground. This is just going to be, I mean, this could be the sky, and all the trees are going to be in front of it. So all we're trying to do is get gray in the background. So it doesn't have to be perfect or anything. And we're going to grab a tissue here in a second, and we'll smudge this around so it doesn't have to be perfect. Okay, so we've got a little bit of gray all the way across. Now there's lots of ways you could smudge this. I wouldn't recommend using your finger. When you use your finger, you're risking, well, one, you're going to get the oil of your finger on the paper, and if you've been drawing a while, you're going to notice that it's going to leave a little mark, and you risk smudging your drawing on the side. So I don't like to do that. I don't like to get my hands dirty, which is why I don't use charcoal. So I like to use just a tissue. Just wrap it around your finger and blend it together. So what this is doing and why it looks smooth is you have a tooth or the texture to your paper. Your graphite, what we just started with, is only going on the surface of the paper, the very top of the tooth of the paper. So when we do this, we're kind of filling in the valleys of the paper. And but the more you do this, the less texture you're going to have. So you don't want to get carried away, because then it's hard to get your pencil to take, or your graphite to take to the paper, because there's not much, it's not as rough, or there's not as much texture to it. Now from there, let's switch. So this is a good exercise to learn your pencils. So we started with a 3H pencil. That's our lightest. Now let's jump to an HB, if you've got it. If not, we're just going to push a little bit harder with our number 2. Let's see, maybe right. So if this is 1/3, maybe 2/3 the way up. Do it very light. We're just going to draw kind of the silhouette of a mountain. And then tiny little triangles. This is the tips of the trees. I know you're not going to see this, and that's intentional. But now we'll just go and darken it up a little bit. And it should just be slightly darker than the gray that we've already put down. There's no detail in this whatsoever. Matter of fact, the less detail is, if you could minimize the detail, it'll be even better, because we want this is going to be kind of out of focus, way off in the distance. But you want it to just slightly contrast against the gray that we already put down. Maybe start darker and just kind of fade it softer and softer, or lighter and lighter as we get down lower. And we'll do the same thing up the other side. Now we'll jump over here. We'll just draw some more little triangles. We're just going to add, just focus on the tips of the trees for now. That's the part that you want to contrast the most, but you definitely don't want real sharp lines. You want it like blurry lines. If you're into photography, this is called depth of field. So the further it is off away from the focal point, or the blurrier it's going to be. Like if you zoomed in really close and you're taking a picture of a ladybug on a leaf or something, everything way off in the background, maybe a forest or an orchard or something, everything's going to be really blurry in the background because you have a small depth of field. If you're not into photography, you may not get that. But when you zoom in close, notice when you're zooming in really close with a fancy camera, it's going to blur the background. And that's kind of the effect we're going for. And it's really going to, when we get going, this is one of those kind of concepts to art, is identifying what the subject is. So yeah, we've got a whole forest, but the forest isn't going to be the subject. The subject is going to be the one tree in the foreground, because everything else is going to be blurry. Maybe where you place the tree, even if we made a little path, wherever that path leads, that draws the eye to it. So it'll create the focal point. So now I'm going to use a blending stump. This is just paper wound up really tight. So if you could imagine this tissue wound up super, super, super tight into a little point, same effect. And people always ask, what if it's when you get it dirty, just use sandpaper and sand it off, or you could get a razor blade. But I like to keep mine dirty because it's almost like a loaded paintbrush. And I don't even necessarily need any graphite on my, or much graphite on my paper to blend it together. So I was talking earlier about all the little nooks or peaks and valleys of the paper, the tooth of the paper. So what we're doing now, you can see it looks a little bit grainy here, but as we start blending it with this blending stump, you're pushing the graphite into the valley of the paper. So the graphite's not just sitting right on the tip. And I'm not going to worry too much down here yet. We're still layering our pencils. Or layering our values. So this was a 2H or a 3H. Now we jumped over to a 2B, or sorry, a HB, or your number 2 pencil. And you can start to see the difference in values. And then from the next pencil we're going to go to is going to be a, let's see, a 2B. And we're just going to add another layer. This time we're going to go all the way to the top of our paper. And we're just going to shade in very simple shape of a tree, of a big pine tree. And it's going to be a little bit lighter at first, but once we use that blending stump, it'll blend it together. But you want it to go a little bit darker than the background and then those trees that we just laid out. So this is what I was talking about. We're going over, you don't have to worry about all those details because we're going over it with these different layers. And it's going to be blurry, so you don't have to worry about any details. And we're just blocking in the basic shape. Like a big, long, skinny triangle. Then you can use your blending stump. And you can see it's going to blur it together. And even blur your edges a little bit. They don't have to be sharp edges. Real soft. If you don't have a blending stump, you could use a tissue. You could use a Q-tip would work. Or you could just roll paper up. You could roll some paper up really tight. So I'm going to do, maybe this one is all the way over here. It's going to go all the way to the edge like this. Using the side of my pencil. I'm just going to draw And you could have some little spots that maybe jut out or something. Maybe that's a big branch. But don't really worry about those details. I'm going to go a little bit lower than this one because our little forest scene is going to be on a hill. And then I'm going to go back with my blending stump. And I like to use small little circles. That'll take, you can see the lines and the directions right now, but if we use small little circles, it kind of hides those. But then you end up with small little circles, but in this case, that's okay. Again, this is all, we're just layering in. This is what I call layering in values. And what we're doing here is creating depth. Just with these different values, you're seeing the background is really way off in the distance and the lightest. Then you've got this other section or this other layer with these mountains way off in the distance. And you've got another layer right here in the getting closer to the foreground. And as we come closer to the camera, each layer is going to be a little bit darker. But before we do that, I'm going to leave this spot kind of white using that same number 2 pencil. I'm just going to draw. This is our little guideline. That's going to be our hill. And everything under here is going to be shaded with that 2B pencil. 2B is kind of the mid-ground for how dark our pencils are going to be. And I always, a lot of beginner artists get intimidated by bigger projects. So that's, if you notice, why I draw somewhat small, because one, I could get it done quicker. And like now, we've got only an hour for this class. But two, some of my portraits or my bigger projects take up to 100 hours. And as a beginner artist, that would be very intimidating trying to do a big project that would take that long. So what I always recommend is, if the project's too big, give yourself about an hour to practice. So if you don't think you could get it done in an hour, draw it smaller. Or if you're not, or if it's if you don't want to draw it smaller, just draw one part of it. Maybe you just focus on the background and the trees for one day and step away, come back the next day. But when you're just getting started, spending 3 hours, 4 hours on one drawing can be a little bit intimidating. I'm going to use the same thing and just blend this all together. And you can see it kind of smashes it in. All those tiny little white dots are starting to disappear, or at least get a little bit lighter, or sorry, a little bit darker. Just remember, the closer we get to the foreground, the darker this drawing is going to get. So this right here is going to be kind of the grass and closer to the camera. We're imagining that we've got kind of this misty forest scene. And then right here, I just want to add it a little bit grayer. So I'm just going to pull some of the graphite from the sides and just kind of blend it so it goes from those hills to lighter and lighter and just kind of blends in a little bit. Now here's the fun part. Now we're going to switch to, actually let's switch. Yeah, let's go for it. We're going to go for the 6B. And maybe right here, using the rule of thirds. 1, 2. So if you broke it down into kind of a tic-tac-toe, rule of thirds, let's draw the focal point of our drawing right on that left third. Be careful not to draw the trunk too thick. But this is going to be, again, this is a 6B pencil. So we're going to draw really dark. Just like that. So if you thought all of this was dark, once you start punching in those really dark values with the softer pencil, in contrast, the rest of your drawing doesn't seem as dark. And actually, I'm getting ahead of myself. We're going to go back to, let's go back to a 3B pencil. And then now we're going to add a little bit darker than here, not as dark as here. We're going to start drawing the silhouette of some more trees closer in the foreground. And there's not much to it. You can see I'm kind of going back and forth, and these little lines are going to kind of hang down a little. But it's not, we're going to blend it together. So there's not going to be a lot of detail. Again, that's on purpose because we want the focal point to be this one tree right here. So now you could grab your blending stump or your tissue or your Q-tip and just blend that together. We're just drawing the silhouette of the tree. There's no detail. There's not much to it. It's just a triangle with some little jagged lines. And it's blurry and it's out of focus. And that just layers in another tree. And you can go back if you need to make it a little bit darker against this one so you could see the separation. Go for it. Just don't make it too dark. And then we'll do the same thing. We'll do another one right here. Maybe it'll be a little bit smaller. We just want layers of different grays. And even if you can't draw, draw a tree, which a lot of people have said, you don't really have to. You're just drawing kind of a jagged triangle. And then you're blending it together at the end. And we'll go back to our blending stump and just blend it all together. And you can see it's starting, maybe you don't notice yet, but eventually it's starting to make this real misty down here. And give that cool effect that we saw. Now I'm going to do one more over here. You can see I'm just kind of scribbling. There's no detail. Going back and forth, almost like little Z's. And then I'll blend that together. So it's just this big layering game. And this simple little trick of adding these different values creates depth to your drawing. Maybe we'll do one more right here. It's going to be a little bit smaller. And we'll go back and touch these up. Right now we're just doing simple shapes. But we'll go back and touch these up once we get the rest of our drawing mapped out. Because you don't want to worry about any of the details right when you get started. Okay. Now we're going to jump back to our 6B pencil. This should be your darkest pencil, or one of your darkest pencils. And we're going to start adding to this tree. Make sure you've got a nice sharp pencil. Again, 6B is what we're going to. So I just start with these little jagged lines. And depending on the type of tree, sometimes they'll hang down, sometimes they'll curve up. But because these are smaller branches, and lighter in weight, I would assume that these are going to point up a little bit. So when you're doing this, start with these little lines and try to leave little spaces, random spaces in between. And we'll jump back over here. And it shouldn't match. It should be an exact match from the other side. See how I'm leaving little gaps? And we'll go over here. So it's just going back and forth. And we're going to work our way all the way down this tree. Again, you could put some little gaps in there. I'd put more gaps in the beginning, and then you can go and fill them in if you need to, if it looks too bare. And once we start getting down here, it's good to have some that kind of cross in front of the others. And it ends up making it look more like a more organic tree. But just experiment with it, and with some of the branches going up, some coming down, make some overlap. Again, try to keep them random in spacing and weight. Maybe we'll put a big gap there. If you wanted to get really fancy and make it as realistic as possible, you definitely need a reference photo, but I'm not using a reference photo. This is just kind of generic from our imagination. And we're going to do the best we can from our imagination. But whenever you're trying to draw realism, you should definitely use a reference photo. But for this exercise, we're skipping it because this is mostly about shading and layering these different values. And then maybe here towards the bottom, or as we start getting lower, you can see how I'm kind of curving them a little bit. And again, have some overlap. The main thing here is just overlapping. Again, we're just trying to draw the silhouette. Try to keep a sharp pencil. Put some that are really thick. And remember, these branches are going to get longer and longer with all the thicker branches and reaching out further and further. And it's not going to go all the way to the ground like a Christmas tree. You can see how they're starting to change direction a little bit. These branches are bigger and they have more weight to them. So they're going to start to hang down a little bit. But again, you could have some hanging down, some pointing up. Try to keep it organic looking. And then maybe this one's hanging down real far. There's not really a wrong way to do it. Maybe I've got put a couple little branches there too. Okay, and you could fill that in more if you want. Make some areas thicker. But we've got the basic shape of our tree down. So now that was our 6B pencil. I'm going to jump back to something in between. This is a 4B. And I'm going to add a couple more. Another layer of trees right here. And when we get down here, it's going to be nice and dark. Almost like it has some bushes there. And you'll go back and forth with your blending stump to blend that together. Maybe right here, this is my 4B. I'm going to draw one more right in between, and this one's going to be darker than these two. Leaving little gaps. But it's not going to be as dark as this one. That's our focal point. That's the subject of the entire drawing, is that middle tree, or that darker tree. And then from there, we'll add this darker little spot, maybe one more little small little baby tree over there. And we'll draw the start of our hill. It's going to be real dark coming down like this. And maybe one more. Let's do one more. This one's going to have real high contrast against that white background. It's just a little baby tree, but it definitely stands out. We're blurring that because it's a little bit out of focus compared to this one. Okay. Now here's the fun part. If you have a little fine tip eraser here, we're going to draw a little path. So maybe, let's see. Path is going to come wrap around like this. Really thin over here. And as it curves around, it's getting a little thicker. We don't want to erase all of it, but we want it lighter. So if you get too carried away with your eraser, you can just blend it a little bit more with that blending stump. And then from there, watch this little trick. As I start erasing a little bit and adding these lines coming up the hill, it shows the contour of our hill. Maybe right here it's going to be really bright. That's the little ridge of our hill. And then we'll do another one over here, really steep right there. We'll do the same thing on this side. This has a more gradual slope to it. Just very lightly, just a hint of the hill, and then maybe right here on the top too, we'll erase a little bit brighter than the rest on the top of the hill because that light's coming through. That wasn't a pencil. That is our mono fine tip eraser. Our mono 0. I realize you may not have one of these, so let's try to erase very small lines. Just make these little contour lines. Now I'm going to go back to my 3B and just add short little lines here and there, usually right above those highlights. And it'll start to create or have a little pretty cool effect.
Hey, I hope you're having a lot of fun and really enjoying the tutorial, but I wanted to remind you, if you want to see more videos like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and the bell so you'll receive an alert every time I post a new video. And if you want to take your drawings to the next level, make sure to check out my Drawing Master course at www.IamShaneBurke.com.
And then we'll do the same thing over here. You want it subtle, but you want to give it some texture. And obviously, this is a small drawing, so you're not going to see a ton of the detail. But when you take a step back, it'll look pretty cool. Now, I always go back and forth and layer and blend. And I know I'm covering up a lot of the work that I just did, but that's okay. I want it to be subtle. And we've only got a couple minutes left, so I'll show you this little trick. So if our light source is coming from over here, we want the bottom of our hill to be darker. That's like the little ridge. And then skip a little spot, because that's the tip of this little ridge that kind of pokes out, right? So that's where the light's hitting it. So skip a little spot right here, and then just draw it darker again. And then if you draw just these little lines like that, just on the bottom, it gives that that little ridge some texture, and it kind of separates it. So you can see almost like these little rolling hills. And then it's not going to be, not on this top side, that's going to be bright. But under here, if we did the same thing, darken up these little lines. You don't want to draw it all the way across, because you want these, you want it to jut out a little bit. And it'll almost look like a little creek, because you could even turn it into a little creek if you wanted. And then maybe you put some little rocks here, some texture. And then what I like to do, I like to put some little growth right here in the center too, but what I like to do is add just a couple little spots here and there, kind of following the direction lines of that hill. Maybe those are little plants, little plant life. And over here, it's probably a little bit more rocky, but we'll still put a few. But you can see just with these simple shapes, it's not super difficult. And when you take a step back, it may not look super detailed, but when you take a step back, it'll start to look a little bit more realistic. I'm just going to darken the bottom of these. Again, it's just a back and forth game with your eraser to add those little rolling hills. And it just kind of using those tools to your advantage. You don't have to draw a ton of detail. You're just going to let these little highlights do the work for you. And one other thing I would say, if you use your blending stump and grab the base of that tree, our light's coming down this way, you start to blend that shadow over. And then you go and clean up all your edges. But it's a back and forth layering game to get the effect and the illusion of all of these different layers and depth. But hopefully that makes sense in your drawing. Once you take a step away, will start to look a little bit more realistic. And then to finish, of course, you need a couple little birds in the sky. Hopefully you've had some fun and learned a little bit. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and the little bell so every time I post a new video, you're getting an alert. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.